Welcome back to the Shadow Dossier. We are taught that the Black Hills Gold Rush began in 1874. We are told that Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer led an expedition of 1,000 men into the sacred territory of the Lakota Sioux, officially to look for a suitable location for a military fort, but unofficially to hunt for gold. We are told that on July 30th, a miner named Horatio Ross found flecks of gold in French Creek, triggering a stampede of prospectors that violated treaties and led to war. This is the history of greed. It is simple, logical, and digestible. But the Shadow Dossier reveals that Custer wasn't looking for gold. He was looking for the sleepers. The Department of War had received intelligence translated from ancient indigenous hide paintings captured during the Indian Wars that the Black Hills were not just mountains. They were a graveyard, or perhaps a dormitory. The intelligence suggested that the Paha-Sapa, the Black Hills, concealed the physical remains of the Nephilim, the biblical giants who walked the earth before the flood. Custer's mission was not economic, it was archaeological. He was sent to confirm if the legends were true. He was sent to see if the mountains were staring back. The Forbidden Land. The date is July 2nd, 1874. The 7th Cavalry Regiment departs from Fort Abraham Lincoln in the Dakota Territory. It is a massive column. 10 companies of cavalry, 2 companies of infantry, 110 wagons, and a detachment of scientists, geologists, and photographers. To the newspapers, it was a scientific expedition. To the Lakota watching from the ridges, it was an invasion of the heart of everything that is. Custer rode at the front. He was flamboyant, arrogant, and hungry for glory. But his private journals from this expedition, which were never released to the National Archives, describe a man consumed by unease. As the column moved deeper into the hills, the environment changed. The compasses began to drift. The air grew thinner, charged with a static electricity that made the horses' manes stand on end. The regimental band played Gary Owen to keep morale up, but the music sounded flat and distorted in the thin air. On July 24th, they reached a valley dominated by a massive granite formation. The Lakoma called it Tunkasala Sakpe Paha, the Mountain of the Six Grandfathers. It was a cluster of granite spires rising 6,000 feet into the air. To the untrained eye, they were just jagged rocks weathered by wind and time. But Custer had the Jefferson Files, the same classified data that had guided Lewis and Clark 70 years earlier. He knew what to look for. He set up camp at the base of the mountain. He ordered the photographer, William Illingworth, to set up his heavy glass plate camera. "Take the picture, Colonel," he ordered, pointing at the southern face of the rock, "but use the polarized lens." Illingworth captured the image. When he developed the plate inside his portable darkroom wagon, he emerged with a face pale as milk. "It's not rock, Colonel," Illingworth whispered. "It's skin." The face in the stone. Custer took the glass plate. Without the polarization, the mountain looked like granite, but with the filter, the shadows revealed the truth. The jagged crags were not random. They formed a profile, a massive, noble, terrifying brow, a nose bridge 500 feet long, a closed eye socket that was deep enough to hold a cathedral. This was not a carving, it was a fossil. The 6 grandfathers were not metaphorical spirits, they were 6 actual entities, pythons, who had been flash petrified eons ago. They were huddled together, fused into the mountain range, frozen in a moment of agony or prayer. Custer realized that the mountain wasn't made of stone. The stone had formed around them. "We go up," Custer commanded. He took a small team, 2 geologists, a scout, and himself. They climbed the scree slopes of what we now call Mount Rushmore. As they ascended, the geology became impossible. The rock wasn't granite or mica. It was a silicate-based organic compound. It was bone. They were climbing the cheekbone of a god. When they reached the shoulder of the central figure, they found the entrance. It looked like a cave, hidden beneath an overhang of rock. But the edges of the cave were smooth, lined with a material that felt like warm glass. This was the ear canal of the Titan. Custer lit a torch and stepped inside. The vein of God. The tunnel did not go straight back. It spiraled inward, following the cochlear geometry of a giant ear. The air inside was stale, smelling of ozone and musk. 50 feet in, the geologist, Professor Winchell, stopped. He knelt by the wall of the tunnel. "Colonel," Winchell said, his voice trembling, "look at this." He chipped at the wall with his hammer. The rock flaked away. Underneath wasn't more stone. It was a vein. A massive, crystallized artery ran through the rock, and inside the artery, glittering in the torchlight, was gold. But it wasn't gold ore. It wasn't nuggets or dust. It was a solid, continuous wire of superconducting gold, running like a nervous system through the petrified flesh of the giant. It's not a mineral deposit, Custer realized. It's circuitry. These beings, they were biomechanical. This was the secret of the Black Hills gold. The gold found in the streams wasn't natural erosion. It was the blood of the Titans, leaching out of the mountains as they decayed. It was highly conductive, distinct from normal gold. The Lakota knew this. That's why they never mined it. They knew it was the blood of the ancestors. To take it was to bleed the mountain. Custer followed the gold vein deeper. It led them to a central chamber, the brain case of the Titan. The chamber was vast, echoing. In the center, suspended in the petrified matter, was a gland, the pineal gland of a Titan. It was the size of a carriage. It pulsed with a faint, rhythmic violet light. Thrum, thrum, thrum. It was still active. The Titan wasn't dead. It was in stasis. It was sleeping. Custer felt a pressure in his head, a voice not speaking English, but speaking in raw emotion, rage, hunger, waiting. The entity knew they were there. It was aware of the insects crawling inside its skull. "Get out!" Custer screamed. "Everyone out!" They scrambled back down the tunnel, the mountain vibrating beneath their boots. As they reached the sunlight, a rockfall sealed the ear behind them. The Titan was protecting itself. The strategic lie. Back at the camp, Custer paced in his tent. He was shaking. He poured himself a whiskey, but his hands wouldn't steady. He had a problem. He had confirmed the existence of the Nephilim. He had confirmed they were alive, and he knew that if they woke up, the United States Army, with its single-shot Springfield rifles and Gatling guns, would be wiped out in an hour. The Lakota knew. That's why they guarded the hills. They weren't protecting the land from white men. They were keeping the giants asleep. Their sun dance rituals were actually frequency-dampening ceremonies designed to lull the entities back into hibernation. Custer realized he couldn't fight the Titans, but he could bury them. He needed to secure the land. He needed to turn the Black Hills into a fortress under U.S. control. But he couldn't tell the public, "We need to occupy this land to guard against sleeping giants." The panic would destroy the nation. He needed a cover story. He needed a reason for thousands of men to flood the valley, dig up the earth, and build infrastructure. He needed greed. He called the newspaper reporters attached to the expedition. "Write this down," Custer told them. "We found gold, gold at the grassroots. Tell the world that a man can get rich just by shaking a pan in the creek." It was the gold rush trap all over again. Custer engineered the stampede. He triggered the Black Hills gold rush intentionally. He knew that the influx of miners would force the U.S. government to break the Treaty of Fort Laramie. It would start a war with the Lakota. It would result in the military annexation of the Black Hills. It was a cold, calculated sacrifice. He was willing to start a war with the tribes to secure the prison of the gods. The shadow of Little Bighorn. The plan worked too well. Thousands of miners flooded Deadwood. The Lakota, led by Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, rose up to defend their sacred duty. The Great Sioux War of 1876 began, but the Titans had marked Custer. When you enter the mind of a god, you leave a footprint, and the god leaves a footprint on you. After the expedition, Custer changed. He became erratic. He claimed to hear voices. He developed a god complex, believing he was invincible. The Shadow Dossier suggests that the Titan's consciousness had partially infected him. It was pushing him toward destruction. 2 years later, at the Battle of Little Bighorn, Custer made a series of tactical errors that baffled military historians. He divided his forces. He attacked a village far larger than his own. He rode into a box canyon. Why? The Lakota oral history says that during the battle, Custer wasn't fighting the warriors. He was fighting the air. Witnesses said he was firing his revolvers at the sky, shouting at invisible enemies. "They are coming! The Stone Kings are coming!" Custer died on Last Stand Hill, but the Lakota did not mutilate his body as they did the others. They pierced his eardrums with awls. History says this was to help him hear better in the afterlife because he didn't listen to the warnings. The Shadow Dossier reveals the true meaning. They pierced his ears to let the pressure out, to release the voice of the Titan that was screaming inside his head. They were performing an exorcism on his corpse. The Mask of Presidents. Custer died, but his report survived. It made its way to the desk of the shadowy cabal running the Agartha Protocol. They realized the Black Hills were a liability. The faces of the Titans were too visible. The 6 grandfathers looked too much like humanoids. If people looked closely, they would see the truth. They needed to camouflage the evidence. In the 1920s, they hired a sculptor, Gutzon Borglum. He was a Freemason, a man who knew the secrets of stone. They gave him a mandate. "We need you to carve a monument. We need you to blast the faces of the rock and replace them with the faces of men." Rushmore was not built to honor Washington, Jefferson, Lincoln, and Roosevelt. It was a mask. He used dynamite to blast away the petrified features of the Titans. He shaved off the alien noses. He drilled into the giant eyes. He reshaped the ancient fossilized biology into the comforting, familiar visages of American presidents. He literally put a human mask on a monster. But Borglum found things during the carving. He found the gold veins. He found the tunnels. That is why he insisted on building the Hall of Records behind Lincoln's head. He told the public it was a vault for the Constitution. In reality, it was a containment bunker. He needed a secure room to store the artifacts he was digging out of the Titan's skull. When you look at Mount Rushmore today, you are looking at the greatest cover-up in geological history. The faces of the presidents are carved into the faces of the giants. Washington's face covers the Alpha Titan. Lincoln covers the seer, but the rock is still alive. Park rangers at Mount Rushmore report that the cracks in the granite heal themselves. They say the mountain groans in the winter, a sound that is too rhythmic to be tectonic shifting. And every year, on the anniversary of Custer's expedition, a strange phenomenon occurs. The gold veins deep inside the rock heat up. The eyes of the president seem to glow with a faint violet luminescence in the infrared spectrum. The Custer expedition of 1874 was the beginning of the end. We woke them up. We tried to steal their blood. And now we have carved our own faces onto theirs, like a parasite claiming the host. But the Titans are patient. They wait for the granite to erode. They wait for the masks to fall. And when George Washington's face finally crumbles, what will be looking out from underneath won't be rock. It will be an eye that has been open for 10,000 years. This has been a file from the Shadow Dossier. The hills have eyes, and we are living in their line of sight. If you look at the official history of Mount Rushmore, you will find a story of patriotism and artistic hubris. We are told that in 1924, a state historian named Doane Robinson conceived the idea of carving the needles, the granite pillars of the Black Hills, into statues of Western heroes to attract tourists. We are told he hired the Danish-American sculptor Gutzon Borglum, a man known for his massive ego and his controversial work on Stone Mountain in Georgia. We are told that Borglum chose the presidents, Washington, Jefferson, Lincoln, and Roosevelt, because they represented the birth, growth, preservation, and development of the nation. It is a clean, inspiring narrative. It is also a complete fabrication. The Shadow Dossier reveals that Gutzon Borglum was not hired to create art. He was hired to perform surgery, specifically cosmetic surgery on a planetary scale. The mountain known to the Lakota as the Six Grandfathers was not a blank canvas. It was already carved. Eons ago, before the last ice age, the faces of the ancient giants, the Titans found by General Custer 50 years prior, had been immortalized in the living rock. The faces were weathering, but they were still visible. To the naked eye, they looked like jagged cliffs, but under certain lighting conditions, specifically the winter solstice, the shadows aligned to reveal the terrifying, non-human visages of the entities that once ruled this world. The government could not blow up the mountain. The debris field would reveal the biological nature of the rock. They needed a cover-up that was so audacious, so loud, and so visible that no one would ever question what lay beneath. They decided to carve human masks over the alien faces. The year is 1924. Gutzon Borglum is summoned to Washington, D.C. He expects a meeting with a congressional committee. Instead, he is taken to a basement office in the War Department. There are no windows. The men in the room do not introduce themselves. They simply slide a file across the desk. It is labeled Project Ozymandias. Borglum opens the file. Inside are the glass plate photographs taken by Custer's expedition in 1874. He sees the mountain. He sees the faces in the stone. He sees the third eye in the forehead of the central giant. Borglum is a man of the world, a Freemason, and a student of the occult. But even he is shaken. He asks, "You want me to destroy this?" "No," the lead agent replies. "We want you to camouflage it. We want you to skin it. You will blast away the alien features and carve the faces of American presidents onto the raw material. You will hide the truth in plain sight." Borglum accepts the mandate, not out of patriotism, but out of ego. He realizes he has been offered the chance to become the architect of history itself. He will be the man who puts a muzzle on the gods. He arrives in the Black Hills in late 1924. He surveys the mountain. To the press, he talks about sunlight and granite quality. But in his private journals, he writes about the vibration. The rock hums, Borglum writes. It is not dead stone. When I lay my hand against the cliff face, I feel a pulse. It is slow, perhaps one beat every hour, but it is there. I am not carving a mountain. I am carving a coma patient. The engineering challenge was nightmarish. Borglum wasn't just sculpting, he was battling the anatomy of the Titans. The face of George Washington was chosen to cover the Alpha Titan, the central figure of the group. The nose of the Titan was too long, too sharp. Borglum had to blast tons of rock to recede the face, creating the plane needed for Washington's profile. This explains why 90% of the carving at Rushmore was done with dynamite. Sculptors usually use chisels and drills. Borglum used explosives. He wasn't refining, he was erasing. He had to remove the outer layer of petrified skin to get to the granite beneath. But as the blasting began, the workers noticed anomalies. When the dynamite charges detonated, the dust didn't smell like gunpowder and crushed rock. It smelled like burning hair and ozone. Occasionally, the blasts would expose cavities in the rock, pockets of geodes filled with a viscous purple fluid that evaporated instantly on contact with the air. The workers were told it was just mineral water. Borglum knew it was the cranial fluid of the entity. The most difficult part of the operation was the eyes. The Titan's eyes were wide set, and according to Custer's report, contained lenses made of a quartz-like material. Borglum couldn't just carve over them. He had to drill them out. He designed the eyes of the presidents to be deep recesses with a granite shaft left in the center to reflect light, a technique to make them look alive. But the Shadow Dossier reveals this was a functional necessity. The granite shafts were actually grounding rods. They were driven deep into the Titan's eye sockets to puncture the quartz lenses and disrupt the psychic gaze of the sleeper. Washington's face was dedicated in 1930. The public cheered. But behind the stone mask, the Titan was reacting. Workers reported that their tools would become magnetized. Drills would spin backwards. Men would suffer from sudden, intense migraines that felt like a voice screaming in a language they couldn't understand. Borglum realized the entity was fighting the surgery. It was trying to reject the graft. He needed to anchor the energy. He looked at the layout of the other faces. He decided to place Thomas Jefferson to the right of Washington. But after 2 years of carving, the rock on that side failed. It cracked. The official story is that the granite was unstable. The truth is that the Titan's shoulder muscle twitched. The rock shifted 3 feet in a single night. Borglum had to blast Jefferson's face off the mountain and move him to the other side. It was a desperate scramble to find a part of the mountain that wasn't moving. Then came the issue of the gold veins.
As the workers drilled into the rock to carve Abraham Lincoln, they hit the same gold arteries that Custer had found. These were the superconducting nervous system of the giants. You cannot have a gold stripe running down the nose of Abraham Lincoln. It would look unnatural. It would raise questions. Borglum ordered the workers to extract the gold. They pulled wires of pure gold, inches thick, out of the rock. They were told to melt it down and mix the dust with granite paste to create a patch. They literally painted over the nervous system of the god to hide the evidence. This gold was never logged in the U.S. Treasury. It was funneled into the black budget of the operation, used to pay for the silence of the hundreds of miners who worked on the hill. But the most dangerous secret of the Borglum mandate was the Hall of Records. In 1938, Borglum began blasting a tunnel behind the head of Abraham Lincoln. He told the press and the public that it was to be a repository for the nation's history. He planned to store the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, and a history of the United States in a bronze vault, sealed for 80 centuries. It was a beautiful story, but it was a lie. Borglum wasn't building a museum, he was building a containment bunker. As they carved deeper into the mountain to shape the heads, they found the central chamber, the brain case of the Titans. They found the pineal gland artifact that Custer had fled from. It was still pulsing. It was radioactive with psychic energy. The government realized they couldn't remove it. It was fused to the mountain. If they tried to cut it out, the shock might wake the Titans fully. They had to shield it. The Hall of Records was positioned directly in front of this biological anomaly. The plan was to line the tunnel with lead and titanium, sealing the artifact behind a wall of history. The bronze vault wasn't meant to keep moisture out. It was meant to keep the signal in. Borglum became obsessed with this tunnel. He spent more time on the hall than on the faces. He realized that the faces were just the mask, but the hall was the leash. If he didn't finish the vault, the energy would leak out and drive the entire Midwest insane. By 1940, Borglum was a changed man. The stress of the mandate was killing him. He began to ramble in his letters to the Department of Interior. He wrote about the silent watchers and the heartbeat in the granite. He told his son, Lincoln Borglum, "The mountain knows what we are doing. It is letting us finish. It wants the masks. It wants to hide." Why would the Titans want to hide? Borglum theorized that they were hiding from something else, something in the sky. By disguising themselves as a human monument, they were using camouflage. The presidents were not a prison, they were a blanket. In early 1941, Borglum made a fatal mistake. He planned to go public. He felt the government wasn't paying him enough for the damnation of his soul. He planned to write a memoir exposing the biological nature of the Black Hills. He booked a trip to Chicago to meet with a publisher. On March 6, 1941, Gutzon Borglum died in a Chicago hospital. The cause of death was listed as a heart attack or a blood clot, but the Shadow Dossier notes that his body was cremated immediately, against the wishes of his family. There was no autopsy. His notes on the Titan anatomy vanished from his hotel room. His son, Lincoln Borglum, was given a choice: finish the job and keep the secret, or join his father. Lincoln Borglum finished the monument, but he abandoned the Hall of Records. He sealed the tunnel entrance with loose rock and walked away. He knew that the vault was incomplete, that the containment was imperfect, but he didn't care. He just wanted to get off the mountain. On October 31, 1941, the project was declared complete. The drilling stopped. The dust settled. 4 massive faces looked out over the Dakota Plains: Washington, Jefferson, Roosevelt, Lincoln. They looked stoic. They looked noble. But they were thin. The stone skin of the masks is only a few feet thick in some places. Behind the eyes of Lincoln lies the petrified retina of a monster. Behind the mouth of Washington lies a set of teeth that are not human. And the illusion is fragile. Geologists monitor Mount Rushmore constantly. They use lasers to check for cracks. They claim it is to preserve the art, In reality, they are checking for movement. They are terrified that the host is beginning to stir beneath the graft. There are cracks appearing in the faces that defy geological explanation. They aren't caused by frost or erosion. They're stress fractures from the inside out. The mountain is expanding. Every night, powerful floodlights illuminate the faces. We are told this is for majesty. But light is energy. The lights are set to a specific frequency designed to suppress the bioluminescence of the rock. If the lights were turned off and you looked at the mountain with night vision goggles, you wouldn't see presidents. You would see the glowing, vein-like circuitry of the gold running through the stone. The Borglum Mandate was successful. It fooled the world. It turned a site of cosmic horror into a site of national pride. Millions of tourists visit every year. They eat ice cream, they buy t-shirts, and they look up at the mountain. They feel a sense of awe. They think it is patriotism. It isn't. What they are feeling is the residual psychic field of the Titans. It is a biological response to being in the presence of an apex predator. The awe is actually fear, processed through the filter of art. Gutzon Borglum didn't create a monument. He created a sarcophagus. He performed surgery on a sleeping god and stitched the face of America over the wound. But stitches rot, and anesthesia wears off. The Rushmore Paradox is this: we carved the symbols of our liberty on the prison walls of our enslavers. We worship the very thing that wants to eat us. And one day, the mask will slip. This has been a file from the Shadow Dossier. The face you see in the mirror is not always your own.
When we look at the history of Mount Rushmore, we see a narrative of conflict. We see the United States government seizing land that was granted to the Lakota Sioux by the Treaty of Fort Laramie. We see the Lakota people protesting the desecration of their sacred mountain, the Six Grandfathers. We interpret this conflict through the lens of politics, colonialism, and religious freedom. We think the Lakota were angry because the white man was carving faces into their church. But the Shadow Dossier reveals that the Lakota elders were not protesting a desecration. They were issuing a quarantine warning. They didn't care about the faces of the presidents. They didn't care about the politics of Washington. They cared about the physics. The Lakota medicine men, the Wiekasha knew what the mountain actually was. They had guarded it for 10,000 years. They knew that the granite spires were not just rocks. They were the containment spikes of a planetary grounding system. And they knew that if Gutzon Borglum drilled into the wrong vein, he wouldn't just deface a mountain. He would trigger a planetary resonance event. The year is 1927. The carving has begun. The roar of jackhammers and the boom of dynamite echo through the Black Hills from dawn until dusk. Gutzon Borglum is tearing the skin off the mountain to find the face of George Washington. But down in the valley, a group of Lakota elders has gathered. They are led by Nicholas Black Elk, the famous medicine man who was a cousin of Crazy Horse and a survivor of the Wounded Knee Massacre. Black Elk is almost blind, but he sees things that Borglum cannot. He sees the thunder beings. In Lakota mythology, the Wakinyan, or thunder beings, are powerful spirits of the storm. They are shapeless, terrifying, and composed of lightning and sound. To the anthropologists of the time, this was just folklore. To the Shadow Dossier, it is a description of a high-energy electromagnetic entity. The Titans buried in the mountain were not dead. They were in a state of suspended animation, held in stasis by the unique piezoelectric properties of the granite. The crystal structure of the rock acted as a cage, absorbing the immense psychic and electrical output of the sleeping giants. The thunder beings were the leakage, the raw energy that occasionally arced off the mountain during storms. Black Elk knew that Borglum was effectively taking a sledgehammer to a nuclear reactor. On a humid afternoon in August, Black Elk walked into the construction camp. He didn't carry a weapon. He carried a pipe and a bag of cedar dust. He demanded to see the stone carver. Borglum, arrogant and busy, initially refused, but his workers were terrified. They had been reporting strange phenomena for weeks, tools becoming too hot to hold, static electric shocks that knocked men off scaffolds, a low-frequency hum that caused nosebleeds and vertigo. The workers threatened to strike if Borglum didn't talk to the Indian wizard. Borglum met Black Elk at the base of the talus slope, amidst the rubble of blasted rock. The conversation was not recorded in the official logs of the National Park Service, but it was preserved in the oral history of the Lakota families who were present. Black Elk didn't talk about treaties. He pointed at the mountain and said, "You are waking the drum." He explained that the earth has a heartbeat, a resonant frequency. The Six Grandfathers Mountain acted as a dampener for this frequency in the Western Hemisphere. It stabilized the tectonic plates and the atmospheric currents. The stone is the skin. Under the skin is the fire. If you drill too deep, you will break the seal. The vibration will escape. It will not stop here. It will travel through the earth. It will shatter the glass in your cities. It will boil the water in your rivers. Borglum laughed. He was an engineer, a man of the industrial age. He believed in dynamite and steel. "It is just rock, old man, granite and mica. It doesn't sing. It yields." "It is not rock," Black Elk replied softly. "It is a shell, and the thing inside is screaming." Borglum dismissed him. He ordered the drilling to continue. He was under pressure from Washington to finish the face of the first president before the arrival of President Calvin Coolidge, who was coming to dedicate the monument. Black Elk didn't leave. He retreated to the ridge opposite the carving. He gathered the other elders. They didn't protest with signs. They began a ritual. They started the keeping song. For 24 hours a day, in shifts, the Lakota drummers played a specific rhythm. It was a slow, heavy beat. To the white workers, it sounded like a war drum. It made them nervous. They thought an attack was imminent. But the rhythm wasn't for war. It was a counter-frequency. Black Elk understood the physics of sound. He knew that the jackhammers and the dynamite were creating a chaotic, high-frequency vibration that was agitating the dormant titans. The drumming was designed to introduce a low-frequency wave that would cancel out the noise. They were trying to soothe the sleeper. They were trying to lull the titan back into its coma. The crisis point came on August 10th, 1927. President Coolidge was due to arrive in a week. Borglum was behind schedule. He ordered a massive charge of dynamite to be placed on the forehead of the Washington face. He needed to clear a massive overhang of rock to reveal the hairline. The drillers bored holes 10 feet deep. They didn't know they were drilling dangerously close to the titan's pineal gland, the violet pulsing artifact Custer had found 50 years earlier. Black Elk sensed the danger. The air in the valley turned metallic. The birds stopped singing. The clouds above the mountain began to swirl into a tight, unnatural spiral, a portal forming in the sky. He sent a runner to the camp. "Do not fire the charge. The thunder being is waking up." Borglum ignored the runner. He ordered the detonation. Boom! The explosion rocked the Black Hills. Tons of granite slid down the face of the mountain. But the sound didn't fade. It echoed. And then it changed. A sound returned from the mountain. It wasn't an echo. It was a roar, a mechanical, biological shriek that shattered the windows of the air compressors in the camp. At that exact moment, a bolt of violet lightning shot out of the dust cloud. It didn't come from the sky. It came from the forehead of George Washington. The bolt struck the main winch cable.
The steel cable vaporized instantly. The elevator cage carrying 3 workers plummeted 200 feet. Miraculously, the cage didn't hit the ground. It stopped in midair. Gravity around the mountain distorted. The resonance event Black Elk had warned about was beginning. The laws of physics were bending. The workers in the cage floated, screaming, as loose rocks drifted upward around them like bubbles in water. The ground began to liquefy. The vibration was so intense that the granite dust on the ground acted like a fluid. The heavy machinery began to sink. Borglum stood on the viewing platform, watching his world dissolve. He felt the vibration in his teeth. He felt the crushing weight of a consciousness that was vast, ancient, and angry. He realized for the first time that the mountain was looking back at him.
On the ridge opposite, the drumming intensified. Black Elk and the elders didn't run. They played harder. They chanted the ancient binding words, the codes given to their ancestors by the Star People to keep the giants asleep. They poured their own psychic energy into the grid, trying to patch the breach. It was a battle of frequencies. The chaotic waking rage of the Titan versus the rhythmic stabilizing order of the Lakota. For 10 minutes, the valley hung in the balance. The violet light pulsed. The gravity fluctuated. And then, slowly, the drumming won. The violet light faded. The gravity returned to normal. The elevator cage crashed to the ground, fortunately from only a few feet up as the field dissipated slowly. The rocks stopped floating. The roar faded back into the deep subterranean hum. The Titan had gone back to sleep. Borglum collapsed. He was bleeding from his nose and ears, a symptom of sonic pressure. The official report of that day states that there was a minor accident involving a winch failure due to lightning. The gravity distortion, the violet light, the floating rocks, all of it was scrubbed from the record. But Borglum knew. That night, he went to Black Elk's camp. The arrogance was gone from his face. He looked like a man who had looked into the abyss. "What is it?" Borglum asked. "What is in there?" Black Elk looked at the sculptor with pity. "It is the history of the world before men," he said. "It is the fire that burns without wood. You cannot kill it, stone carver. You can only cover it." Black Elk gave Borglum a warning that would dictate the rest of the project. "You must finish the faces," Black Elk said, "but you must not cut deeper. You must leave the eyes blind. Do not drill into the pupils. If the Stone Kings can see the stars, they will call their brothers from the sky." This is why the eyes of the presidents on Mount Rushmore are so unique. Borglum changed his technique. He didn't drill deep pupils as he had planned. He left granite shafts, grounding rods to block the vision of the entities beneath. He also changed the design. Originally, the sculptures were supposed to be full figure down to the waist. After the incident in 1927, Borglum convinced the funding committee to stop at the shoulders. He claimed it was a lack of funding. The truth was, he was terrified to carve any lower. He knew the heart of the Titan was located in the chest cavity. He didn't dare get close to it. The Lakota elders continued their vigil throughout the construction. The tourists thought they were protesting. In reality, they were the safety crew. They monitored the resonance of the mountain every day. When President Coolidge arrived for the dedication, he wore a Lakota headdress. The press called it a publicity stunt. The Shadow Dossier reveals it was a protective talisman given to him by the elders to shield his mind from the psychic radiation of the mountain. The Lakota warning of 1927 was the moment the project changed from art to containment. It was the moment the government realized They needed the indigenous guardians. To this day, the relationship between the Park Service and the Lakota is complex. Yes, the protests continue, but there is a secret liaison office. When the seismic sensors inside the mountain pick up a spike in the heartbeat, the park rangers don't call geologists, they call the elders. And what about the Crazy Horse Memorial? A few miles away from Rushmore, another mountain is being carved. A massive statue of the Lakota warrior Crazy Horse. It has been under construction for 70 years. It is far larger than Rushmore. Critics ask why it is taking so long. The Shadow Dossier suggests that the Crazy Horse Memorial is not just a statue. It is a counterweight. The Lakota are building a second energetic node. They are carving the mountain into a specific shape designed to focus energy into the earth to counteract the energy radiating out of Rushmore. It is a geometric lock. Crazy Horse is pointing his finger. We are told he is pointing to his lands where his dead lie buried. But if you follow the line of his finger, it points directly at the forehead of George Washington on Mount Rushmore. He is not pointing to the land. He is pointing to the enemy. He is keeping the Titan in check. The warning of 1927 was ignored by history, but it saved the planet. The next time you see footage of Native Americans protesting at Mount Rushmore, look closely. Are they holding signs, or are they holding drums? Are they shouting at the government, or are they singing to the rock? They are the only thing standing between us and the waking of the gods. They are the wardens of the Mountain of Kings. This has been a file from the Shadow Dossier. The drum beat you hear is not music. It is a lifeline.
If you climb the scree slope behind the massive granite head of Abraham Lincoln on Mount Rushmore, you will find a doorway. It is cut into the solid rock of the canyon wall. It is 18 feet tall and hidden from the view of the tourists below. It leads into a tunnel that goes 70 feet into the mountain and then stops abruptly. The National Park Service calls this the Hall of Records. They tell us that the sculptor, Gutzon Borglum, intended it to be a grand repository for American history, a place where the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, and bust statues of famous Americans would be stored for future civilizations. They say it was never finished because Borglum died and the funding ran out. This is the polite fiction. The funding didn't run out. It was diverted. And Borglum didn't stop digging because he died. He died because of what he found when he dug too deep. The Hall of Records was never meant to be a museum. It was meant to be a prison cell. The year is 1938. The faces of Washington and Jefferson are complete. The face of Lincoln is emerging from the stone. But Gutzon Borglum is a man on the edge of sanity. He has spent 14 years skinning the mountain, blasting away the petrified features of the ancient titans to replace them with human masks. But the mountain is fighting back. Throughout 1937, the seismic sensors implanted in the rock face had been registering a pulse. It wasn't the random settling of granite. It was a rhythmic, biological thumping. It was coming from deep within the chest cavity of the titan that lay beneath the Lincoln sculpture. Borglum knew what it was. It was the heart. General Custer had found the pineal gland in 1874, but the heart was the engine. It was the source of the violet radiation that caused the thunder beings, and it was waking up. The heat emanating from the core of the mountain was increasing. In the winter, snow would melt instantly on the back of Lincoln's head. The government handlers, the majestic agents before there was a Majestic 12, gave Borglum a new directive. We cannot kill it. We cannot remove it. It is fused to the tectonic plate. If we try to cut it out, the shock could trigger a volcanic event that would wipe out the Dakotas. We must contain it. They ordered Borglum to build a bunker. This is why the location of the Hall of Records is so specific. It isn't in a convenient place for tourists. It is located directly behind the hairline of Abraham Lincoln. Geologically, this spot corresponds to the path of the cranial nerve of the Titan. It was the only soft spot in the petrified armor where they could drill without shattering the mountain. Borglum began the excavation in July of 1938. He told the press it was for a shrine to democracy. He showed them drawings of a grand staircase and bronze doors. He was building a legend to hide a laboratory. The work was brutal. The rock inside the canyon was harder than the surface granite. It was black silica, a material that dulled diamond drills in minutes. Borglum had to use Cornish miners, men specialized in deep vein blasting. As they tunneled deeper, the environment inside the shaft became hostile. The air was thick with static electricity. The miners' hair would stand on end. Flashlights would flicker and die as their batteries were drained by the ambient field. At 40 feet in, they hit the membrane. It looked like a wall of obsidian, slick and wet. It pulsed. Borglum cleared the tunnel. He sent in only his most trusted foreman and a team of government scientists wearing heavy lead-lined suits. They set up a localized Faraday cage, a mesh of copper wire to shield themselves from the radiation. They drilled through the membrane. What they found on the other side defies conventional biology. They entered a cavern that was not carved by water or wind. It was the chest cavity of a god. Suspended in the center of the cavern, held in place by petrified arteries the size of tree trunks, was the heart. It was massive, roughly the size of a city bus. It wasn't made of flesh. It was a biomechanical construct, a lattice of living crystal and gray metal. It glowed with a terrifying, rhythmic violet light. Thrum, thrum, thrum. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. It resonated in the marrow of their bones. But the most terrifying discovery was that the heart was not just beating, it was transmitting. The scientists set up their equipment. They detected a signal being broadcast on a frequency that shouldn't exist, a scalar wave. The signal was directed upward, through the rock, through the atmosphere, and into deep space. Borglum realized the truth. The Titan wasn't just a sleeping giant. It was a beacon. It was calling for help. It was calling for the rest of the fleet. "We have to block the signal," the lead scientists shouted over the roar of the pulse. "We need shielding. Lead isn't enough. We need gold." This explains the unexplained disappearance of the gold extracted from the mountain during the earlier carving. Borglum had been stockpiling it. Now he understood why. The construction of the Hall of Records shifted gears. They weren't building a room for paper documents. They were building a Faraday cage on a massive scale. They lined the walls with lead plates. Then they applied a layer of the melted gold dust mixed with concrete. They were trying to create a dense barrier that would absorb the scalar waves and prevent the signal from leaving the Earth. Borglum became frantic. He stopped sleeping. He spent his nights in the tunnel listening to the heart. He began to claim that the heart was talking to him. "It knows my name," he told his son Lincoln. "It calls me the skin carver. It hates the mask I put on its face." Borglum's design for the Hall of Records included a massive bronze vault door. He claimed this was to protect the Constitution. In reality, the bronze door was a blast shield. He designed the vault to be hermetically sealed. He included plans for a ventilation system that, upon closer inspection, was actually a cooling system. He planned to flood the chest cavity with liquid nitrogen to lower the temperature of the heart and slow its metabolic rate. By 1939, the tunnel was 70 feet deep. They were right against the chamber of the heart. The gold shielding was partially installed. The signal was dampening. But then, the war began.
World War II broke out in Europe. The U.S. government's focus shifted. They needed resources for the Manhattan Project.
They needed uranium. They needed scientists to build the bomb. The funding for the Rushmore containment was cut. Borglum was furious. He traveled to Washington, D.C. to plead with Congress. "You don't understand," he screamed in a closed-door session. "If we don't seal the chamber, the signal will get out. They will come. The ones who built it will come." The generals dismissed him. They were worried about Hitler, not ancient giants. They told him to finish the faces and go home. Borglum returned to the mountain, a broken man. He knew he was running out of time. The heart was beating faster. The plasma discharges were becoming more frequent. In a desperate, final attempt to seal the breach, Borglum tried to use an esoteric ritual. He was a Freemason, and he knew the power of symbols. He carved a specific set of coordinates into the floor of the tunnel, a geometric lock designed to bind the entity. He placed a capstone, a smaller version of the artifact found by Custer, into a niche in the wall. It worked temporarily. The pulse slowed. The violet light dimmed. But the strain was too much for Borglum's heart. He wasn't just fighting bureaucracy. He was fighting the psychic pressure of an angry god. On March 6, 1941, Gutzon Borglum died. The official cause was a blood clot. The Shadow Dossier suggests his heart simply stopped, synchronized to the moment the Titan's heart skipped a beat. He was switched off. His son, Lincoln Borglum, took over. He knew the truth. He knew the Hall of Records wasn't finished. The government ordered the project shut down in October of 1941. They sealed the entrance to the tunnel with loose rock. They told the public it was incomplete due to the war. But before they left, the Army Corps of Engineers installed a fail-safe. They placed a tactical nuclear device, primitive but effective, deep inside the tunnel, wired to a seismic trigger. If the heart ever woke up fully, if the Titan ever tried to stand up, the nuke would detonate. It would vaporize the head of Abraham Lincoln and collapse the mountain onto the entity, burying it forever. That nuke is still there. Today, the Hall of Records is strictly off-limits. If you try to climb the canyon wall to reach it, you will be arrested by park rangers who carry weapons far heavier than standard issue. There are cameras pointed at the entrance 24 hours a day. In 1998, the Park Service allowed a ceremonial completion of the hall. They placed a titanium vault in the floor containing ceramic tablets with the story of America. They claimed this fulfilled Borglum's vision. This was a maintenance mission. These ceramic tablets were actually new shielding tiles. The titanium vault was a replacement for the corroding lead box. They were patching the leak. But the signal is still broadcasting. Radio telescopes around the world pick up a wow signal every few years. Astronomers say it comes from deep space. The Shadow Dossier knows it comes from South Dakota. It is the answer to the call sent by the mountain. The heart of the giant is still beating. It is patient. It waits for the power to fail. It waits for the gold shielding to crack. And sometimes, late at night, tourists in the parking lot report hearing a sound, a low, rhythmic thumping that they feel in their chest. They think it's the bass from a car stereo. It isn't. It is the sound of the prisoner pacing in his cell. This has been a file from the Shadow Dossier. The monument is beautiful, but the thing it hides is alive.
History tells us that Gutzon Borglum, the master sculptor of Mount Rushmore, died of a broken heart. They say he worked himself to death, that the stress of funding battles and the physical toll of climbing the mountain at the age of 73 finally caused his body to give out. The official death certificate, filed in Chicago on March 6, 1941, lists the cause as a heart attack followed by complications from surgery. It is a tragic ending to a great American life. It is respectful, it is plausible, and it is a lie. Gutzon Borglum did not die of natural causes. He was murdered. He was silenced by the very agency that hired him because he had committed the ultimate sin of a government contractor. He had developed a conscience. Borglum had spent 14 years skinning the mountain, carving the masks of presidents over the faces of the ancient titans. He had built the Hall of Records to contain the beating heart of the giant. He had followed every order given to him by the Shadow Cabal. But in the winter of 1940, Borglum found something else. He found the one thing the government didn't know about. He found the fifth face. To understand why Borglum had to die, we must go to the dark side of the mountain. Mount Rushmore is famous for its southeast face, which catches the morning sun. This is where Washington, Jefferson, Lincoln, and Roosevelt look out over the plains. But the mountain has a back. The northern and western slopes are rugged, treacherous, and perpetually shadowed. They are known as the blind side. In November of 1940, the main carving was nearly finished. The workers were refining the lapels of Roosevelt's jacket, but Borglum was restless. The seismic sensors he had installed in the Hall of Records were picking up a new vibration. It wasn't coming from the heart. It was coming from the other side of the peak. Borglum told his son, Lincoln, that he was going to scout a location for a massive entablature, an inscription of American history that was supposed to be carved into the mountain. This was his cover story. He took a coil of rope, a rock hammer, and a lantern. He climbed over the crown of George Washington's head and rappelled down the sheer, icy cliff of the north face. He descended 300 feet into a narrow canyon that split the granite like an axe wound. The sun never touched the bottom of this ravine. It was a place of eternal twilight. As Borglum swung on his rope, his lantern illuminated the canyon wall. He expected to see raw granite. Instead, he saw an eye. It wasn't a human eye. It wasn't the closed, sleeping eye of the titans he had covered up on the other side. This eye was open. It was carved or fossilized into the black silica rock. It was wide, almond-shaped, and terrifyingly alert. It was part of a face that had been hidden by the geometry of the canyon. Borglum swung closer. He traced the lines of the face. It was sleek, angular, and predatory. It didn't look like the titans. The titans were heavy, brutish, earthly. This face looked insectoid. It looked like a gray. It was the face of the jailer. Borglum realized the terrifying truth. The titans weren't just sleeping in the mountain. They were prisoners. And the fifth face wasn't a prisoner. It was the warden. The mountain wasn't just a tomb. It was a cage built by a different species entirely. A species that came from the stars eons ago to lock the giants away. By blasting the mountain, by carving the presidents, Borglum hadn't just defaced a grave. He had damaged the lock. He found fissures radiating from the fifth face. The vibrations of the dynamite had cracked the warden's containment field. The thunder beings weren't just escaping energy. They were distress signals sent by the warden. Borglum climbed back up the mountain in a state of shock. He realized that the entire narrative was wrong. The U.S. government thought they were controlling the mountain. They thought they were the jailers. But they were just the janitors. The real power was the alien intelligence embedded in the north face. And it was waking up. Borglum knew he couldn't tell his handlers. The majestic agents would just order him to bury it, or worse, try to weaponize it. He decided he had to tell the people. He believed that if the public knew the truth, that humanity was living on a prison planet caught between two warring alien species, it would unite the world,
It would end the wars in Europe. He began to write. He drafted a manuscript titled The Shadow of the Rock. In it, he detailed the biology of the Titans, the location of the heart, and the coordinates of the fifth face. He included sketches of the warden. In February of 1941, Borglum made a call to a publisher in Chicago. He told them he had a story that would shatter the history of the world. He arranged a meeting for early March. The call was intercepted. The wiretap report was sent to the War Department. The order came down within an hour. Asset has gone rogue. Terminate contract, terminate asset. Borglum traveled to Chicago by train. He was paranoid. He told his wife he felt he was being watched. He carried the manuscript in a leather satchel that he never let out of his sight. On March 5th, he checked into a hotel. He complained of indigestion. It was likely a mild poisoning, a warning shot, or perhaps the stress of the secret finally manifesting physically. He went to a local hospital for a checkup.
This was the mistake. A hospital is the perfect place for an assassination. You are alone, you are vulnerable, and you are surrounded by chemicals that can stop a heart without leaving a trace. The official story says Borglum had surgery for a prostate condition and died of a blood clot. The Shadow Dossier reveals a different scene. On the night of March 6th, a man entered Borglum's hospital room. He wasn't a doctor. He was dressed in a doctor's coat, but his shoes were military issue. Borglum was awake. He saw the man. He reached for the call button, but the wire had been cut. "Where is the manuscript, Gutzon?" the man asked calmly. "It's with my lawyer," Borglum lied. "If I die, it goes to the press." The man smiled. "We know it's in your hotel safe. We already have it. Your lawyer is unavailable, and your son, Lincoln, is currently at the mountain. It would be a shame if there was a blasting accident." Borglum froze. They were holding his son hostage. "The mountain is waking up," Borglum rasped. "You can't stop it. The fifth face, it's watching." "Let it watch," the assassin said. "We like being watched. It keeps us sharp." The man produced a syringe. It didn't contain medicine. It contained a concentrated solution of potassium chloride and the synthesized neurotoxin derived from the blue fluid found in the Titan's veins. It was a poetic death. They were killing the sculptor with the blood of his subject. The injection was quick. Borglum gasped. His heart fluttered, raced, and then seized. The assassin wiped the injection site. He placed the call button back in Borglum's hand. He walked out of the room, nodding to the nurse at the station. Minutes later, the alarms went off. The doctors rushed in. They tried to revive him, but it was too late. The sculptor was dead. The cover-up was immediate and total. Agents raided Borglum's hotel room. They took the manuscript. They took his journals. They took the sketches of the fifth face. They sanitized his existence. Back at Mount Rushmore, the news hit like a thunderclap. Lincoln Borglum, Gutzon's son, was devastated. But before he could even grieve, he was visited by the same men in gray suits. They didn't offer condolences. They offered an ultimatum. "The project is over," they told him. "The funding is pulled. You will shut down the site. You will seal the Hall of Records. You will destroy any notes your father left regarding the North Face. Do this, and you live. Speak of this, and you join him." Lincoln Borglum was a good son, but he was a frightened man. He complied. He announced to the press that the monument was finished. This confused everyone. The original plan had called for the president to be carved down to the waist. The Hall of Records was supposed to be a grand museum. The entablature was supposed to be a massive history of the U.S. inscribed on the mountain. Lincoln Borglum canceled it all.
He left the presidents as floating heads. He left the hall as a rough tunnel. He declared victory and walked away. The public accepted it. The war in Europe was dominating the news. No one cared about an unfinished carving in South Dakota, but the mountain remains. If you look at satellite imagery of Mount Rushmore today, you will notice something interesting. The resolution of the images for the main faces is incredibly high. You can see the cracks in Lincoln's nose. But if you scroll to the north side of the mountain, the blind side, the images are blurry. There are shadows that seem pixelated. Google Earth and government satellite feeds deliberately obscure the topography of that canyon. Why? Because the fifth face is still there, and it is not eroding. While the faces of the presidents require constant maintenance, filling cracks with silicone to prevent water damage, the fifth face remains pristine. The black silica material does not weather. It does not age. There are rumors among the modern urban explorers who sneak into the restricted zones of the park.
This was the mistake.
A hospital is the perfect place for an assassination. You are alone, you are vulnerable, and you are surrounded by chemicals that can stop a heart without leaving a trace. The official story says Borglum had surgery for a prostate condition and died of a blood clot. The Shadow Dossier reveals a different scene. On the night of March 6th, a man entered Borglum's hospital room. He wasn't a doctor. He was dressed in a doctor's coat, but his shoes were military issue. Borglum was awake. He saw the man. He reached for the call button, but the wire had been cut. "Where is the manuscript, Gutzon?" the man asked calmly. "It's with my lawyer," Borglum lied. "If I die, it goes to the press." The man smiled. "We know it's in your hotel safe. We already have it. Your lawyer is unavailable, and your son, Lincoln, is currently at the mountain. It would be a shame if there was a blasting accident." Borglum froze. They were holding his son hostage. "The mountain is waking up," Borglum rasped. "You can't stop it. The fifth face